All right. Good evening and welcome to today's webinar. We hope to give you our insights on how you can accelerate change within your organization with the all-new LeanIX Business Transformation Management module. We launched this module last month at a flagship community event called EA Connect Days, and we are here to tell you all about it. I'm Sagar Sheth, Product Marketing Manager at LeanIX, and with me is Johannes, who's our lead product manager at LeanIX. We're going to start with a quick introduction about LeanIX for those of you who are new today, and follow with the importance of business transformation in enterprise architecture. And then Johannes will walk us through a use case and a demo of the LeanIX BTM in action. In the end, we have a short Q&A session. To submit your questions, please click on the Q&A button in Zoom. So we all see and experience in our daily life that changes in technology and business expectations do not align, and it's pretty complex to deal with. But we at LeanIX believe that managing IT shouldn't be. That shouldn't be that complex, at least. LeanIX is a single source of truth for corporate IT and product IT to create transparency of the present, but in order to also shape the future in a more understandable business context. Talking about the present, LeanIX is the best solution to map the as-is state of your architecture. As an enterprise architecture management solution, it answers the questions of what software solutions you have in your organization. Not only standard software systems depicted here, but also captures the custom developments in your organization. We then create a mapping to your key business drivers, understanding which softwares are used where, like say, for example, in marketing, sales, production, customer success, and so on. The next step is then to usually understand the dependencies between the softwares, to understand the data flow. This is what we capture. LeanIX also then helps you understand on which technology your software systems or applications are running on. This is also for you to understand or to mitigate risks early on. But most importantly, we help you make decisions. And this decision is on what softwares you would like to invest, tolerate, migrate, or eliminate. This is great as LeanIX helps you manage the as-is state of your architecture. But now let's look at the future. Let's look at how LeanIX helps you shape the future of your organization. And this is where we talk about the importance of business transformation in enterprise architecture. Evidence shows us that 70% of transformations fail. When we look deeper into this problem, we see that it sort of leads to three main reasons. That being missing preparation when starting an initiative, lacking monitoring from ideation to implementation of the transformation initiatives, or late identification of constraints and risks, especially on the side of the architecture. We see that there's a strong demand to support these transformations because companies such as yours often see that you need to migrate your data workloads to the public cloud, or you need to roll out a new global ERP system, or you want to modernize your IT landscape. And much more relevant in today's times is the change of operating model, for example, due to COVID-19. Looking at the existing road mapping solutions, we see that they lack support. They lack support in terms of they're way too inflexible. You have the long-term strategic roadmaps that are for 3 or 5 years, and they cannot be changed. They cannot be dynamic enough to be changed at different points in time. You then have that they miss the lacking of traceability on how these business objectives are achieved. You understand that they have been achieved, but how do we now track it back to which business objective, and how do we then go back and report to our execs? Roadmaps often stay high level in Visio or PowerPoint and have no direct link to the execution. And once the execution is completed, we see that oftentimes it lacks streamline update of the enterprise architecture documentation. So how are we solving this problem? This is by and large a huge issue, but how are we now tackling this issue? LeanIX Business Transformation Management module is like the GitHub for IT roadmap planning, where we think of just one active architecture, comparable to how software developers store their code in a main branch. Now, let's say you want to model a particular change in your architecture. To do this, you say you have a plan, and now this plan is, for example, to migrate finance systems to the cloud. You do this in so-called transformation items. Within this plan here, depicted here in the yellow dots, you can model out changes to the active architecture, and we call this impacts. You can not only model a plan, but you can also model several scenarios. So say you have a plan over here, but now you want to try out and see two different scenarios. So you say one scenario over here is scenario one by HR system Workday, or you want to see if scenario two makes more sense, which is build HR system internally. Upon the completion or upon a chosen path that you want to go ahead with, you can now execute the impacts to your active architecture or make these changes to your existing architecture itself. And we call this execution of your impacts. In the future, we will also allow you to connect it to workflows outside of the enterprise architecture tool, starting with Jira. The benefits of this approach is by and large being proven in software development. And now we want to bring this approach to the world of enterprise architecture. The benefits here, as we see, are that multiple teams can work autonomously on the roadmap. We see that different scenarios can be compared with each other, and you can choose the one that better suits your path. External workflows, as discussed here, can trigger execution, and you can remove a plan if you feel that it's no longer needed and it doesn't affect your architecture. The planning and modeling is just one part of it, but now is where the fun begins. How do you actually look into the future? How are you able to make a decision for your future and then shape the future of your organization? This is where LeanIX now helps you visualize future states like with the time machine. Not just about looking at your as is state or your current state for your architecture, but it's also about jumping into a future point and looking at the and having a visual representation of the different plans and scenarios that you've modeled out. To explain more, Johannes will now take us through a demo and use case.
Thank you, Saga. Let me briefly take over. Yeah. So in the next around 30 minutes, I want to guide you a little through what the BTM module is and how it actually works once we go into the tool and look at it in action. Before I want to do that, I wanted to talk about some, let's say, fundamentals, groundwork, so that everyone understands what we're actually doing in here. The first thing I want to highlight is the extended data model that we introduced for with the BTM module. So LeanIX comes with an approved or proved best practice standard data model. And this is the data model that we've now extended by an additional 2 fact sheet types for business transformation management. The first fact sheet type that we introduced is the objective, and the objective is actually like the representation of strategic goals within your organization. So with objectives, we actually want to help you to identify the things that you want to improve to in general improve your business. And objectives allow a high-level progress tracking of strategic initiatives across your organization. They help you to identify critical business capabilities, and they help you to enable an org-wide transparency of all the strategic goals that you have within your organization. The second new fact sheet type that we introduced is the transformation item. And the transformation item then is used to detail out plans to achieve certain objectives. So transformation item themselves can hold impacts on the architecture, and they can be used to model out different scenarios. You can do like a high-level approach and concentrate on like plans and building blocks, but you can also detail out very precise scenarios by leveraging epics and projects. And looking at the relations that we see from objectives to business capabilities, from business capabilities to transformation items, and between the transformation item and the objective. We have now like a definition of a certain triangle where you can understand where in your architecture are you changing things, so the business capability. What are you trying to achieve with the objective? And what are you actually doing to achieve the goal? So the what you are doing with the transformation item. But maybe let me make a brief example on how those pieces fit together. So let's take the example where company A wants to move their internal applications into the cloud by 2022 to increase their IT efficiency by 20%. If we take that sentence, we can very precisely split it up into a transformation item of type plan. So you have a bigger initiative to move internal applications into the cloud by 2022. And this kind of resembles the transformation item of type plan in LeanIX. Whereas the increase IT efficiency by 20% is like the equivalent to the business objective that you're trying to achieve. So that in the end means, well, if you want to achieve that plan, you will, as an EA, will have to work with the respective business leaders to achieve a number of different points. So the first one being, you want to be able to map affected business capabilities to objectives, to understand where in your architecture are you following a certain strategic goal or strategic objective. The second thing is you want to define plans to achieve the objective. So now understand and model out what are you doing to achieve an objective. Then, of course, you want to understand the impacts on your architecture. And for that, you can model impacts on, for example, affected applications or interfaces, IT components, data objects. So you can be very precise in expressing what are you changing in your architecture as part of a transformation item. And then, of course, you want to visualize all the things that you've modeled out based on multiple dimensions. So we're looking at dimensions like time or cost or context, and always being able to grasp what is ongoing in your organization, which objectives are being followed, which transformations are ongoing, which initiatives are you implementing. And then in the end, of course, you want to be able to decide which is the optimal scenario for your use case. You want to execute on a plan and track the progress of the objectives that you have within your organization. We've mentioned the word impacts quite a few times already. And impacts for us are a very explicit change to the architecture that will happen at some point in the future. And well, with impacts, you can actually, you can create and manage them on transformation items, and you can express certain changes. And impacts you can then use to visualize the changes that will happen to your architecture. And I will show that in a few examples in a few minutes. So you can use it to project upcoming changes or possible changes on your actual landscape. And then in the end, of course, once a certain transformation item has been implemented, you want to execute those impacts. So you want to say, okay, now I've finished a certain project and the planned changes need to be implemented and they need to go into like your real architecture, so the main branch of your architecture. And that you can simply do by executing the impacts on the current architecture. When looking at BTM and the use cases behind BTM, we actually found quite a huge variety of use cases that we found in organizations that use LeanIX. We, for example, found in global retailers the rollout of SAP for HANA. We found a lot of transformations, cloud transformations to public or private clouds. We found organizations that wanted to stabilize and modernize their infrastructure in general. So I think the variety of things that we can do with BTM actually stretches quite across a different number of use cases. Let's take that as the groundwork to deep dive into the actual product. So if we jump into LeanIX and start going into the inventory, we can see the two new fact sheet types in action. So we have the objective and the transformation item. So let me talk about objectives for a few minutes. Objectives should resemble the strategic initiatives that you have in your organization. We usually found that organizations have like a number of or like 5 strategic pillars that they want to work on within the next years or the next 2 to 5 years. And you can actually model them out as objectives. And what we also find is that in a number of organizations, these major or key objectives that are for the whole organization are actually broken down into smaller objectives for each of the departments or parts of the organization that actually try to achieve those objectives. And you can do that by creating multiple objectives and then put them in a hierarchical order. But let me give an example where we have an objective to build out an intelligent cloud platform. And this objective now splits into, well, 2 child objectives, where one resembles to create a multi-cloud analytics dashboard for budget control, and the next one wants to achieve that, well, inventory management and logistic processes are actually moved to the cloud. So with the definition of these objectives and their relations to business capabilities and the transformation items that you have in LeanIX, you can now easily understand what are all the ongoing initiatives within your organization. This insight is actually supported by a number of different reports. So for example, I mentioned already that it is very easy to actually understand all the objectives or ongoing objectives within your organization. In this case, we're now looking at the whole objective landscape of the organization. So you can easily understand what are the key pillars, strategic pillars that you're working towards, and how each of the underlying objectives are actually related to each other. What you can also do is, by the relation to business capabilities, is you can easily identify where in your architecture do you have certain strategic hotspots. You can do that by switching to the business capability map and cluster it by objectives. So you can see that, for example, the automate legal approval processes that require a signature has an impact on your business capability, corporate services, and legal. If you want to really concentrate on, now please show me which are the strategic hotspots in my architecture for example, for the upcoming year, you can also use, again, use the objective landscape, cluster it by business capability, and you directly get an insight on your business architecture and all the related strategic initiatives that are currently ongoing. So in this case, I can identify that, well, in legal, there's actually quite a few objectives. So that means this is one of my strategic hotspots for the objectives that I currently have within my architecture. Going back to the inventory, I want to talk a bit about transformation items. So you can see that transformation items are split into 4 different subtypes. The key reason behind it is that, well, we think that modeling can happen on, well, different levels. We can do a very high-level approach, or we can actually deep dive into certain topics and model them out very precisely. The first hierarchy level is the plan, and the plan acts like as a bracket to hold all underlying transformation item of a certain plan or scenario together. So if we look into a plan, we can see that each plan actually has a defined timescale and a duration. So in this case, the cloud transformation plan for 2021 runs for 12 months. And you can, in addition, add a certain life cycle to the plan. So you could actually define that a certain plan runs for even longer than 12 months. So you're very, very flexible in defining how long a certain plan is going to take. There is a number of additional attributes that you can not only add to a plan, but to any transformation item. And these items, for example, are a t-shirt estimate. So it helps you to identify what is the estimated investment size that is required to actually implement what you're planning. You can add a priority to identify which ones are the things that you really need to do and which are the things that you might even postpone to a later stage. And of course, with investments, we also have to talk about cost. And for us, it was important to support like an initial possibility to do estimations, but in the end also to capture what the budget is after you've planned out a certain scenario, in addition to understand what the annual follow-up cost of a scenario would be. You can also define the business value and the implementation risk. So for example, in this plan, we have a large benefit, but we also do have a moderate implementation risk. And all of these attributes can then later on help me to identify which are low-hanging fruits, which are high-risk items with, for example, low business value. And that also helps me to, in the end, make a proper decision based on data that I have. So imagine that you have two different scenarios, and these properties can actually help you to identify the scenario you want to follow up with. In addition to the descriptive properties, we of course have a number of definitions or relations within the architecture. So of course, each plan and each transformation item needs to have an ownership. So you can easily identify or add ownership of a plan either to a certain user group, but you could also just limit it to a single team within your organization. A transformation item also supports certain objectives to always help you to understand, okay, what are the elements or the actually initiatives in your organization that you are trying to implement to achieve a certain goal. So you can always understand why you're doing something and what you're actually doing. And then, of course, we have the hierarchical relations between transformation items. In this case, I've modeled out for Cloud Transformation 2021 actually a number of, well, high-level packages of functionality, so a number of building blocks that I want to implement to achieve the my cloud transformation goals for 2021. But let's have a look at one of those building blocks. So you see the structure is very similar to a plan. So once you've understood how that works, you don't have to relearn it for every subtype of transformation items. Again, also for building blocks, you can define a duration and you can also define a relative start date. So that means this building block actually will run for 8 months and it will start 1 month after the plan has been started. So you can even do a relative planning in case you don't know when the plan actually will start. So you can actually model out a complete plan without even knowing what the initial start date will be. Again, we have a number of prioritization items, so prioritization and budget and business value and risk. We also can, again, define ownership, understand what objectives are supported, what business capabilities are improved. And if you have external providers for certain projects or for certain functionality, you could also define in here who's providing this transformation item. But let's now jump to the third hierarchy level where we're talking about epics and projects. So in this case, I've modeled out a project where I want to integrate an existing application with my SAP BI. So what I can do in here now is I can actually, well, again, filter priorities. I can again define what objectives are supported. But the key thing about transformation items is, and I've mentioned it already, is impacts. So in here, I can now only also define the very explicit impact that this project will have on my architecture. And to do that, I will briefly introduce you into the usage of impacts. So impacts are usually organized in so-called impact groups. That means I can add a semantic description for an impact group, and then I can start to model out the actual changes to the architecture that I want to make. So you can see that I get a suggestion for any fact sheet type, but in this case, I want to model a new integration. So that would mean, in this case, what I need to do is I need to take my Law Plus application, and I now can start model changes on that application. So what I want to do is, well, to create an integration. What I need to do is I need to create, of course, a relation to an IT component to SAP. Sorry, to actually need to consume an interface. And what I'm modeling now is, well, I'm consuming a certain interface once the project has been finished. And with this mechanism of impacts, you can not only like model the creation of a relation. You can also go onto the Law Plus application, and once you've modeled that certain change, you can set, for example, the technical fit, because it now has a new integration to an adequate level. And with this functionality of impacts, you are very free to model actually any change within your organization. Now that we've modeled a very low level change, I want to take a step back and model a higher level change. So let's go into the building block again. So, and in the building block, which is, well, a high level package of functionality, we can, for example, now say, okay, once we've improved the tools or all the tools that are used in that business, in a certain business capability, what we want to do is we actually want to increase the maturity of a certain business capability. That being said, I've now modeled like a scenario for next year, but of course, I now need to understand what are the actual changes that will happen to my architecture once I apply the scenario to my architecture. And to do that, we jump back into reporting. And now the first thing we want to do is we want to understand what are the actual scenarios that I have at hand. And you can use the transformation landscape to do that. And you can now, for example, see what the priority of each of the transformation and scenarios and all the underlying transformation items is. And you can also understand where in your architecture that will actually happen. So what I'm doing now is what I did also for objectives. I want to see my, my business capability landscape by clustered. I want to see my transformation landscape by clustered by business capability, so I can easily identify that this is an item that will have an effect on my legal business capability. What I also wanted to show is the roadmap capability. So once we've modeled out or start to model out a certain scenario, excuse me, of course, I want to be able to understand how on a timeline perspective my scenario will be. And we talked about timing and relative start dates. And with the new transformation roadmap report that we introduced with BTM, for me, it's now very easy to understand the sequencing of a number of, well, different transformation items within a given plan. So I've selected my cloud transformation plan, and I now can understand when certain things will happen. So in this case, we were looking at the move legal apps and processes to the cloud. This is the building block that will make a change to the actual maturity of my legal business capability. And now I can easily understand within that high-level package of functionality, within that building block, when each of the projects will happen. So you can see that, well, this one is going to be the first project that is implemented. Then I will take care of another project, and so on and so forth. Of course, also in here, I can again go in and understand what am I doing for which business capability and what's the time frame for each of the business capabilities. Referring back to the example that I just made, in here I can see that, well, for the legal business capability, there's just a single initiative going on as I've modeled in this workspace. So it's easily to understand what will happen in a certain business capability, but also what will happen and what is supporting a certain objective. So what I'm looking at now is like all my strategic initiatives and what am I going to do when to achieve those initiatives. The next thing I want to show is how can I use impacts to make projections on my architecture. To do that, I can actually use any landscape report. And in this example, I want to talk about my application landscape. So what I can do now, I can jump into my landscape and select a plan that I want to project onto my actual landscape. So my landscape actually looks like this. So you see there is a lot of red, there is a lot of things that I should be working on, and looking into the future, I will see that actually a number of life cycles to change. But now let's assume that I want to apply a certain scenario, and in this case, the Cloud Transformation 2021 scenario to my, oh, I'm not looking at life cycles, that's why nothing changed. So this is my current architecture, and my future architecture will look a little different. You see that a few life cycles changed. But what I now want to do is I want to, well, take a scenario and apply it to my landscape. So once I select a certain scenario, I automatically see that, well, that my timeline has changed. So I'm now only seeing the timeline of that certain scenario. And in addition to that, we now take all the impacts and apply them onto the landscape. And I think this becomes a little more easily to understand once I change that view. So let's make the assumption that as part of my cloud transformation scenario, I'm actually working on a number of different applications, and my main goal is, well, to move them to the cloud and to increase the technical fit of the applications. So you see that, well, on the 1st of January in 2021, I still have a few red spots on my architecture, on my landscape. And what I can now do is, by using impacts, model out the changes in my architecture, and then jump into the projected state of my architecture at the end of the plan. And you can see that, well, quite a few of those applications that had an inappropriate or unreasonable fit actually changed to being adequate or fully appropriate. And you can even see that in a few cases, and I want to highlight the legal business capability in here, in a few cases, not only like a property has changed of technical fit, but I even introduced a new application to be used and replaced an existing application. So you see there is a new application called Digilex that actually replaced another application. Last but not least, I want to show you how impacts are actually being made transparent within your organization. So therefore, I want to jump into an application. And in this case, we saw that this application is impacted by a number of different transformation items. And once you've activated BTM, you will actually able to see all income and impacts on every fact sheet type. So this is not only valid for applications, but the same would happen for IT components, for interfaces or business capabilities. Whenever a transformation item is going to change the fact sheet, we will have an impacted by. And in the impacted by, I can now, for example, as an application owner, easily understand when a certain change will happen to my application. And I can even see what the actual change is going to be. In this case, I as an application owner can now understand that, well, as of the 1st of March 2021, there will be a new interface that my application uses, and my technical fit will change to adequate. In addition to the impact-related and transformation and objective-related reports, there is another set of reports that I want to highlight today. The first one being the transformation portfolio report. And for every LeanIX user that has worked with portfolio reports, these actually help me to easily understand where are low-hanging fruits, or what they in the end they compare two different properties with each other, and give me an insight if I have, for example, in this case, transformation items with a severe implementation risk and a marginal business value. So these are the items that I have to look at closely when undergoing my transformation, whereas I can use that also to identify, for example, low-hanging fruits where I have a low implementation risk but a significant benefit. I also want to have a brief look at the investment distribution. So the investment distribution report should help you to understand where in your strategic, where and how you are investing into your strategic initiatives. So you can see if you're actually spending the money into the right transformations or transformation items, right initiatives that support the most important objectives. In this case, this actually looks quite fine and aligned to my strategy. So I see that I'm actually investing heavily into my overall and into the objective to improve my overall business and IT performance. The other report that I want to highlight is the transformation cost report that helps me to understand, well, in general, how much is my transformation costing me? So how much am I spending on my cloud transformation 2021 or 2022? And it even breaks down into like the lower levels of each of those transformations. So it helps me to easily understand what am I investing in a scenario. Is that the right decision? I can make a data-driven decision upon based, as I said, multiple dimensions. So we saw the time dimension, now we have the cost dimension. We looked at the cost dimension when clustering, for example, the transformation landscape by business capability. So I can generate a lot of insights that help me to make, well, the right decision when I want to invest, and to make the right decision to decide for the correct scenario or the fitting scenario for my organization. At this point, I want to briefly summarize the key features of business transformation management. First, I mentioned it, we have the two new fact sheet types, the objective to define high-level strategies, to map objectives to business capabilities and transformation item, and to enable high-level progress tracking, and the matching report. So we have the objective landscape that helps me to understand how are my strategic goals structured, and the investment distribution to understand, am I investing into the right and the most important objectives? And second, we have the new fact sheet transformation item. Sorry. Split into four subtypes, being like the plan, that, well, the bracket that holds all transformation items in a certain scenario together. The building block to, well, define impacts on a very high level, and then epics and projects to define impacts on lower levels. Then the showing of impacts on affected fact sheets to make strategic changes transparent within the organization, and the execution of impacts on fact sheets. And the related reports here are the transformation landscape that helps me to understand what are my initiatives, the transformation cost to understand what am I investing into certain transformation items, and the transformation roadmap that helps me to identify and to, well, put all the transformation items that I have onto a timeline and understand the sequence of all of those transformations. But in the end, of course, I want to highlight again the key benefits of BTM. So with BTM, you can gain an instant transparency on all ongoing initiatives with the objective, and that helps you to effectively manage architectural changes across the organization. The second key benefit is, well, that you can actually collaboratively plan scenarios with business stakeholders. You can instantly identify conflicts and risks through different types of visualizations. And in the end, well, you can prioritize and execute an ideal plan by envisioning the outcome, by making projections onto your actual architecture. And we think that this accelerates key decisions through having the right data at hand and being able to make data-driven decisions. That being said, I would open up for the Q&A.
So thank you so much, Johannes, for that fantastic demo. We have a lot of questions that have come in. So to the first question that we have, what is the difference between fact sheet project and fact sheet transformation type item with subtype project?
There are not a lot of differences. And what we did is, and the confident LeanIX user actually might have recognized the color of transformation items. So what we did is we moved projects into the tree of transformation items. So we saw that, well, I mean, if we look at the semantic description of a project is something that changes something within your architecture. At least that's our understanding of projects. And we thought it would enrich projects if we put them into the transformation item, but give them, well, a little more facets by adding like epics for agile, organizations that follow agile principles, and also extending like the project itself to make high-level plannings with building blocks, and then grouping this together by plans.
Okay. The next one is, can you define and visualize dependencies between impacts, also across plans?
Actually, yes, this is possible, and maybe I can briefly show that. So there is a number of different dependencies that we can model and visualize between transformation items. There is two types that we have in the tool as of today. And the first one is a requires relation, which in the end means, well, to finish this transformation item, I need to finish this one. So it's a finish to finish relation. You can add them simply on the fact sheet. And the second relation that we have is the blocks relation, which is a finish to start relation. So in this case, I've modeled, I need to finish the project I'm looking at. I need to finish this one. And now in addition, I model that, well, I not only need to finish this one, but I also need to have finished this one to start it. And once we've modeled those relations, we can again go into the transformation roadmap and actually look at those dependencies. There should be somewhere here. Yeah, and so you can visualize those dependencies. Let me briefly jump into the quarterly. That makes it a little more readable. So we visualize the dependencies, and we can even see that this dependency is violated because it's red. So it's not only you're able to visualize or define it, you can even see once a certain dependency is being violated, and you have to change your plan again.
Awesome. I think this is going to be useful for a lot of our customers. The next question is it possible to add instances of new fact sheets, for example, new applications or capabilities that only go live in a specific scenario?
Yes, that is possible. And again, I want to briefly highlight it. Maybe we have a fitting one. Yeah. So you can not only, well, make changes in regards to changing certain properties, but it's also possible to create a new application, or actually any new fact sheet type. In this case, let me start with an application. And you can do that simply by using this new fact sheet as impact. So what you now get is like the standardized way to create a new fact sheet, and you create the application. But this application will only exist once you finish that project and you actually execute on the impact. So once you click the execute button, it will exist. Before that, it doesn't. So you can actually model out different solutions by using different applications or IT components.
Perfect. The next is there a way to compare two different scenarios?
There, we currently see a number of different opportunities to compare scenarios. One is to actually look at the different landscapes and like hold them next to each other, so you can actually compare them. Then, of course, you can use the cost reports to understand what are the investments needed to follow or implement a certain transformation. But in addition to that, we have a number of roadmap items that actually will concentrate on that issue to make it easier to compare different scenarios.
All right. The other one is, are there any best practices available on how to model scenarios? For this, I can answer. We do have a white paper that we just released and will be sent out to you after the webinar. And I think it sort of drafts out a very good framework for best practices that we at least propose at LeanIX.
And if I'm allowed to add something to that, so the module has been released 2 weeks ago. We are working on a number of different use cases with a broader set of customers. And I think once we have made a few steps forward in there, we will have additional best practices for different transformations, because in the end, every type of transformation is different, and there isn't like a general best practice, I would say.
Fantastic. I think that's pretty much it. I think with this, we'd like to conclude and thank all of you for joining in. Stay safe and stay healthy, and thank you again.
Thanks for listening in, and have a great day, everyone.